Je vais interroger Nicolas Théry.
Well, we'll perhaps start with Nicolas Théry first, then. Yes, that's fine. What did you think about this discussion, except for the enormously high caliber of the discussion? Well, I think it really did answer the questions of the choices that have to be made. We must highlight the fact that the banking sector does not necessarily have deep pockets. It's really an expression of collective choices. And really, I would like to begin with this point, because I think in both round tables, we talked a lot about how to serve growth, how to support the green digital transitions. And we see each time it is a matter of mobilizing an entire ecosystem. And I think a sector-based approach, you may find this a little bit odd that the president of a sector, a federation of a sector, should say this, but I think the banking sector is fundamentally an auxiliary of public policy, of monetary policy. I mean, of course, there's lots of things in between, lots of cogs in between, and lots of great leaders and so on. But ultimately, it is an auxiliary of monetary policy, and we are just a lever for transfer of the monetary policy and transferring credit loans and so on. So these definitions that define us, this includes the challenges and the stakes. So first thing we have to say, obviously today we're talking about planning for the green transition, we're talking about green planning and also investment, planning investment for growth. So what is the role of the banking sector in this planning? I think our history here is very interesting. Obviously, we're not going to be able to plan the economy. Well, we have a real obligation to plan for this. Well, yes, absolutely. And once we have taken into account the prudential issues, the issue of prudential regulation, so once that has, we have to decide, are we going to support this through those rules or not? I think we do now have a connection with Mairead McGuinness. Good afternoon, Commissioner. Thank you very much for being with us here on the FBF conference. We've talked a lot about the transitions, the recent crises, also Ukraine, the health crisis. For you, Madam Commissioner, do you think that this reinforces the need for European sovereignty in this area, in the banking sector? And I used a concept earlier, which is that of financial autonomy compared to other economic zones. Is this something you can take on board?
Well, good afternoon. And yes, I'm live with you from Brussels and happy to join. There's a few points. I don't think that Europe ever will talk about closing off to the rest of the world. So we talk about open strategic autonomy. But we've learned lessons, not only in this terrible time of war, but previously with the health crisis, that we were vulnerable in some areas of supply chain. And in fact, that was obvious before COVID hit. And therefore, we had to take action on the health part of our societal agenda. And we did good work there when we were united and strong and collectively worked on vaccines, etc. We now need to look at other issues. And you've been discussing energy. I was able to eavesdrop on the conversation. So we're very developed, but we're very vulnerable. And on energy, we are taking huge steps. Yesterday, you saw the announcements here in the Commission around our efforts to diversify, more efficiency, and particularly ramp up investment in renewables. But our financial system, in my view, is the backbone of the entire economy. We need a strong, resilient financial system to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. But there's good pieces to be said about banks, and I think some comments already made. We came through a horrible financial crisis. We regulated effectively, and that stood the test of COVID because our banks were strong and resilient and were available and able to channel public money towards sectors and individuals individuals where support was being given. We're concerned about non-performing loans, and it's obviously something we continue to watch. But to the credit of the banking system in Europe, it was part of the solution around COVID. But we all know that our banking system is changing rapidly, indeed, because of COVID and digitalization and the arrival of fintechs, large and small. So we want a resilient financial system. Even with the change, we need innovation. We have to support innovation, but equally be aware where there might be risks.
Madame la Commissaire, je voulais également vous poser
Madam Commissioner, I would like to ask you another question, which was the subject of our debate here this morning in Paris. We talked about the prudential ratios, and we took the example of the most well-known of these, Basel III, as it's known. For you, do these financial ratios, do these help banks in Europe invest? We were speaking earlier with an economist. When Europe is in difficulty, are these prudential ratios a hindrance to the possibility of European banks to invest?
It's important to remember that these are international standards, and Europe is part of that process of making sure that there is an international standard that we apply. There was a huge amount of debate in the run-up to our proposal around Basel. Really concerns around the points that you make as to whether this might impact in a negative way the capacity of banks to continue to lend. So I'll make a few points on this. We're very mindful of the scenario we were in at the time of our proposal, but we were also minded to ensure that we would faithfully implement the Basel package, because we don't want anyone to have a sense of our banks not being able to meet these standards. And that's important for our banks and their future. So that's a key point. But secondly, we were also aware that politically we were asked to make sure that there wasn't a dramatic increase in capital requirements. And that was also part of our considerations. And indeed, other parts included the need for investments in the sustainable economy and society that you've already been talking about. So that package is now, I met the rapporteur yesterday in the corridors of the European Parliament. The Parliament is working very well on this package, so we wait to see what the co-legislators say. I mean, perhaps there is a sense that people think, well, now it's different, now we shouldn't implement. I would take the opposite view. I think we have to be firm in our international commitments, and we should not resile from them while being conscious of unintended consequences, because here we're very clear. We want our banks to be strong, and we want them to play their full part in the post-COVID recovery and in this new situation that we face because of this awful war in Ukraine.
Je voudrais juste, avant de revenir, Madame la Commissaire.
Sorry, just before we get back to the role of banks during the green and digital transition, and we'll ask for your point of view in a minute, but if I may just ask Nicolas Théry to respond to what you just said.
Commissioner, happy to meet you, and congratulations for the Commission proposal on Basel, which is a very interesting starting point for us, and we have a lot of good discussions. And maybe, sorry, I will come back to French.
I'm going to now switch back to French. Yes, we need international standards. This is extremely important, but we do not have a standardized model for this. And so the real difficulty is confusing banking standards with the diversity of models. These two are not to be confounded. And I think it's extremely important that we have a European banking model. This is much more intermediated, as it were, than in the United States, which relies on a different model and holds liabilities on their balance sheets and amortizes, accompanies, supports this transition. These are separate issues. And if I can sort of summarize Madam McGuinness and Madam Théry's proposal, model, finding the right balance means finding the right balance between the standards and the model. And actually what we're seeing is that we have a housing loan a market model that is different here in Europe to the US, and we must ensure that the standards and the norms do not crush this model that has very, very strong positive externalities. We saw this in COVID, we saw this in social protections, and let me give you a very concrete example of this. There are conformity rules, standards for conformity. You have to know your customer, KYC. You need to know what the source, the economic source of this. There are needs for transparency and for conformity for all of society. And when there were financial sanctions, and I commend the Commission for their speed in enacting these sanctions on Russia, in 24 hours, all banks implemented these, especially the French banks. And really, it is the number, I won't tell you exactly the number of Russian loans that we have. This was extremely very low. And when we compare this to Coinbase and crypto assets and so on, there were 25,000 accounts. And suddenly we find a way to say, long live liberty and freedom. Crypto assets are a lever for freedom. And so it's the past and the present, they have to intersect at some point. Here they are applauding Nicolas Théry's words. Do you have... what do you think about what has just been said?
On ne vous entend pas. Voilà.
Un moment, s'il vous plaît. Pardon.
Apologies, microphone is on.
I'm hoping that the applause was also for the opening remarks, which I very much appreciate, that our package, as was said, is a good starting point. We believe it's a very balanced proposal. That's the first point. The second point around the European specificities, and here we were very, very conscious, including around mortgages, to take account of those specificities and have phase-ins. So we listened very carefully to everybody that came to us with particular issues and tried to balance the package. I think the issue on sanctions and crypto. So yes, again, thank you for the comments around the work the Commission and our colleagues did here with sanctions. We worked sadly on this before Christmas. We hoped there wouldn't be a war, and tragically there now is. We've got 5 packages which the member states and the financial system, I have to say, have really wanted to do the right thing and implement faithfully and fully, and we're trying to support them in that. But I don't underestimate the challenge for all of our systems to get this right. So it is a work in progress and an important piece of work. But around crypto, I mean, look what we've seen in recent days, in the last 7 days around crypto, where stablecoins weren't quite so stable. I have been very, if you like, focused on this since I took on the role here, because I'm aware that there is a younger generation, but others as well. But there, there is a younger generation who are not, if you like, terrified by the risks that might come with crypto and are investing. And I've been listening to those voices, and I've been saying, look, we like innovation, but we really are concerned about risk. And I think on this, we are also well ahead globally, because we have 2 proposals. One, the marketing crypto assets proposal, coming through very well with the co-legislators, but also looking at cybersecurity issues as well. So I think on these areas where you've just mentioned, we are really, I think, hand in glove. And if I were there, I would have applauded you for raising these points, particularly around crypto, because there is a sense in which some in that space want to be outside of regulation, where there are those of us who understand that if that persists and were to prevail and something goes wrong, you might very quickly see the public, in other words, taxpayers, being pulled in potentially to save something that we had no role in. So that's why we regulate now. That's why we want to make sure that, including around money laundering work that we're doing to conquer this, and including sanctions, that there is more transparency in that space. So I hope I get a round of applause for agreeing with that intervention, and thank you.
Oui, vous avez des applaudissements, Madame la Commissaire.
Yes, of course, you shall be applauded as well, Madam. Before we look again at the transition and the role of banks, if we can just come back to what Commissioner McGuinness said about solidity as compared to vulnerability, I am convinced that banks must align for solid pillars in order to ensure their services to the public. We don't speak a lot about one of these, which is, of course, financial solidity, Basel objectives. We need capital, governance, and so on. The second solid pillar that we need, and again we don't talk about enough, is IT. Informatics. I want to highlight once again all of the dangers and linked to IT architecture. We talk a lot about the virtual world. It is actually very, very physical, this virtual world. There is a data center. Where are they? Well, those of us who had data centers in Russia are not the happiest at the moment. Those of us who believe that public cloud and that having all financial information out in the cloud is fine, well, I'm sorry. No, I don't think that's the case. Data centers must be located. They must localized. They must be mainframed. And they can have dedicated, secure, and confidential clouds in place to protect customers. And this can be a major stake. And then, thirdly, the pillar of the environment, the ecology, the green pillar. So, crypto, are you part of it? Are we going to make like Bitcoin and use coal mines to run the systems? I mean, you know, this is we're able to shoot ourselves in the foot in a way that is sometimes quite incredible. And then fourth pillar, public freedoms. We must at the same time ensure the completely transparent nature of transactions, and yet at the same time protect privacy, digital intimacy, and financial privacy, because this is absolutely crucial. And so when you align finance, IT, environment, and freedoms, well, then you are in the European banking model. Mairead McGuinness, just one word about the role of banking in the environmental transition and the digital transition. We know that some companies, budget in terms of their budget, are struggling to adhere to the stability pact that we mentioned earlier. In your opinion, is the role of European banks in general, is this essential to finance investment? As we heard from the president of the WWF, we're talking about 500 billion euros per year.
Okay, well, look, the sums involved are enormous. And clearly in Europe, and we've been compared with the US, we do rely, or our businesses rely on banks for financing. We're trying to develop capital markets union in parallel with banking union, because we know that there is a very incomplete picture when it comes to finance across our member states. And we are pushing our vision for stronger capital markets, more liquidity, and equally strong banks, because we want companies to have choice, whether it's loans or equity. We're trying to remove some of those barriers. When it comes to the transition, whether it's the sustainable, I prefer the word sustainable than color coding, frankly. I think it's more clear. So when it comes to this transition towards a more sustainable economy, clearly large sums of money are required, and including the digitalization, plus the costs of making sure that there is cyber security. But I think we should look at this as an opportunity. What we're doing in the Commission is trying to guide private finance towards sustainability. So we have our taxonomy. We will have corporate sustainability reporting directive. I recall many decades ago studying accounting and finance for a diploma and only studying numbers and figures and percentages. If I were doing that today, it would be looking at sustainability criteria and the money. So we will get to a place soon, I think, where financial information and sustainability information have an equal footing. The challenge now, because of the outcome and the impacts of the war in Ukraine for the European economy, are enormous. But again, there's an opportunity to accelerate what we were doing in any event against a horrible background. And therefore, we do need that the banks can provide liquidity and finance to companies, but we do also need to develop strong capital markets. So it is a step-by-step process. We are making progress there, and we want to continue that process. We're also hoping that the president of the Eurogroup will have a roadmap for banking union, which has long been discussed. We know it's incomplete, and we know that we could complete this if there is political agreement and if we can resolve some of the tensions within the discussions between member states. So for me, it is really important that we have strong banks, that they move with the times, which they are doing, and they're not holding on to all of the services they're providing. They are being, facing competition from others in the marketplace, but they are key for our SMEs at the moment in terms of access. And I did reference how during COVID that was very, very important and very visible and very much appreciated. I think around the points you made, Nicola, around the cyber issue. Here again, every single one of us has received this unwanted text message or an email or whatever, and it's fraud. So the financial system is the most targeted. We know that war can come in many forms, not just the physical that we're seeing and the awful results of that in Ukraine, but cyber attacks are political. The member state I know best had a terrible attack on its health system, so computer records. So we need to make sure that our vulnerabilities there are addressed. We need resilience right across the board. I had an interesting conversation with some elected members to local councils yesterday, and one of the councillors raised the issue of cash and was very concerned that we were making cash less available because she was concerned about the virtual world if things go wrong. And I made the point, two of them. First of all, the Commission defends the right to have cash, and we are really concerned that cash is there for those who want to use cash. And we're working very hard to make sure that we have resilient financial systems around the whole cyber piece. But that is literally a work in progress on a day-by-day basis, because as we advance with technology, the criminals are sometimes ahead of us. And I think that is a huge challenge, even around investments for our financial system, to make sure that they are more resilient and can resist these terrible attacks.
Merci, Madame la Commissaire. Quand j'écoute...
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. When I listen to the Commissioner, Nicolas Théry, I feel like I want to ask you the following. Strong Europe, independent, strong, sovereign Europe, that seems to be the key to unlocking all of these issues that we have been talking about today. I will be asking the Commissioner the same question. What do you think about this strong, independent, sovereign Europe? Well, it's a nice formula. I fully agree with that. The matter is, how do we get there? I would say, for the moment, the French Banking Federation, at least for my part, is fully behind the Europe that you describe. The difficulty that we have with these debates is that, well, yes, it's true, French are world champions in loving Europe when it's a French Europe. And we have had the greatest success when Belgium, Ireland, Luxembourg, and Czechia, they of course love Europe when it's to their taste. And so what we've done in Europe, we have 27 member states, and we sort of added a 28th, which is Europe. And so, as regards Crédit Mutuel, it's less simple, less smooth than it was with the previous Europe. And this is very difficult to accept, because the goal was to create a level playing field and to avoid this sort of multi-tier system with 27 plus 1. And actually, what we would ideally like to see is the 27 should meld into one. one rather than having another one. But I don't know if you like football, but I'm sure you're familiar with Gary Lineker.
C'est un jeu qui se joue à 11 contre 11.
And 11 against 11, and it's always Germany that wins at the end. And of course, well, this has perhaps changed recently for the younger ones, but for those of us who are fans of Seville. Anyway, we're not going to get into footy talk just now. What is striking to me is that there is a theory of Gary Lineker in banking union. It is played by 27. It is the French banks that foot the bill at the end of it. And that is not the strong, competitive, productive banking union that we were talking about earlier. We have been really taken to the cleaners in many ways. We do not want a banking union if we're going to be taken to the cleaners again. So, being out off in this way, once okay, but twice no thanks. Yes, thank you for that. I will leave the last word to our Commissioner, Madam McGuinness. You can respond to what Thierry has said, or perhaps you can respond to my initial question. Sovereign and independent, strong Europe. Does this require a banking union? Perhaps you can begin with this, and then you can perhaps respond to Nicolas Théry. Thank you.
Look, the key to Europe's success, and despite our difficulties, we are strong, and I think we have to remind ourselves of our strength. But the key to that success and strength is unity in diversity. And I regard Europe as a work in progress. But if I speak specifically to Banking Union, Capital Markets Union, so in the treaties, many decades ago, in the early days, we talked about a capital market in Europe, so freedom of movement of capital. There's huge opportunity and potential there. I note the comment around the French view of banking union, but I really appreciate that the French do want to see banking union complete. And it in a way has to happen, and I think it will, but maybe we're not sure of the timelines. One of the things that strikes me when we talk about independence, sovereign, strength, yes. Sovereignty, yes, but not to the exclusion of others. Independent, yes, but not to the exclusion of others, because Europe has a part to play globally, not least around, supporting those who need support, but also around the values of democracy and the rule of law. So I don't think Europe will, embrace itself only, but I think we won't be naive. And that, for me, is the key, whether it's our financial system, where I am really looking very carefully at the impact of Brexit and the need to have stronger financial infrastructure within the EU 27 and needing to make decisions around that, whether it's our pharmaceutical supply chain, whether it's the supply of chips, as you've just mentioned, with the CHIPS Act. We are not naive. We have to understand that the world is more fragmented today than it was in January, sadly. We are looking at supply chains that have not recovered from COVID and indeed are impacted by this war. So we have to be very, very sensitive to our vulnerabilities and address them. And we're doing that, and I think we'll be stronger for it, notwithstanding that this is a time of great change and challenge for governments around the European Union, but it's equally a time of opportunity for us to complete some of the policy areas that we are still working on. And the key for me is to bring our citizens with us, because they're difficult times with inflation, with concerns for the most vulnerable in our society, with all of this transition to more renewables, etc. So we do have to work very firmly with the European Parliament, with our member states, and here internally in the college, to do the right thing, to make the right proposals, conscious of the significance of the world we're in today. And I think I'll perhaps finish on a rather down note. I think it's important for us to realise, sadly, that the global financial system will be impacted for the medium to long term because of what has happened. We've had to introduce sanctions to show our absolute disapproval of what's happening, what Russia is doing and Belarus supporting them. We will see the impact of those sanctions grow over time. And there are consequences for the entire global financial system. Maybe a conversation for another day. But for me, the key in Europe today is no naivety, building our strengths, making sure we don't have vulnerabilities that are addressed. And my role is to address those in the financial system. And with the cooperation of stakeholders, including our banks, I think we can achieve that.
Merci, Madame la Commissaire.
Thanks, Ms. Ma'am, European Commissioner. Thanks for being live from Brussels. Thank you, Nicolas Théry, head of the Bank Federation. Thanks to Mairead for her trust, confidence, and the communication department for the organization of this conference. Thank you, Nicolas Théry. I would like a round of applause for Eric because he did it. He had a lot of people join us, and the entire FVF made up teams and the technical teams. And thank you. Congratulations.
May I say thank you from Brussels? Au revoir.
Commissioner, thanks.